Before I start the video, there's a couple things I want to mention. First of all, I finally bought a half-decent microphone, so let me know if you like how it sounds in the comments. Second, the description of this video will have a lot of information in it, like the name of the song and gameplay used, as well as information about ketamine that you can check out if you're interested. Third, a few months ago, I made a community post on this channel that talks a bit about why I was gone for so long and what videos I want to make in the future that you can check out if you're interested. Lastly, this video covers multiple different trips which will be separated by chapters on the time bar. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. The first ever time I did ketamine was actually at a clinic that offered it as treatment for depression. My mom had been doing the treatments there for a while, and since I also had depression and ketamine was something I was interested in trying for years, I got her to ask the place if they let me do it too. I thought it was a long shot, but since this place was shady and not following regulations, they said yes, no questions asked, and that I could start next week. I was very excited. The only other dissociative I had done at the time was DXM, which was my favorite drug, but I thought ketamine would likely be a lot better and become my new favorite. On the day of the appointment, I got driven to the clinic and talked to the person behind the desk. They said each person got their own room to trip in, and I got to pick from a couple different ones. The one I picked had a comfy armchair and a trippy lamp that had different colored lights. I sat down and the nurse took my blood pressure before handing me the ketamine, which was in a nasal spray thing. I put it up to my nose and pressed down the plunger, and then the nurse left me alone. I shut off all the lights except for the lamp, and I listened to music on my phone while waiting for it to kick in. A few minutes later I did, and it was kicking my ass. I thought since it was a medical dose, I wouldn't trip that hard, but my vision was blurry. I felt a huge wave of euphoria, and I was so dissociated that I could barely think. I continued listening to music and messaged people on Discord, just calmly enjoying my trip, and before I knew it, the trip ended almost as quickly as it began. Unlike most other dissos, ketamine only lasts 3 hours, so if you don't redose, it goes by super quick. The nurse came back in to check my blood pressure, and when they finished, I was able to go home. Overall, it ended up being a really great experience, and I guessed right, ketamine was significantly better than DXM. Ketamine is like the good feelings from a DXM trip, but way better and without any of the nasty side effects. I also prefer the shorter 3-hour duration over DXM's 12-hour duration because that way it's not a huge commitment to trip on it. I would continue doing these sessions at the clinic for a while after this, but pretty soon I'd get a chance to try real recreational ketamine with some friends. A guy I was friends with at the time named Isaac had recently ordered some ketamine from a dark market online. The first time he tried to do this, the seller accidentally sent him meth instead of ketamine, but this time he actually received the ketamine and said he would bring it with him next time we hung out with our mutual friend Tony, because both Tony and I wanted to try it. The day came and Isaac picked us up in his car. After driving around for a bit, we decided to go to a park right next to a lake that we would go to fairly often. Isaac parked and we all got out and started walking. A bit past the playground was a trail that went through some woods, and if you followed them for a bit, off the side you'd find an area with a concrete floor and a concrete wall covered in graffiti that people called the stoner wall. We decided to do the ketamine there because we'd have a decent amount of privacy, and as soon as we got there we sat on the floor and took out the ketamine. Since it was our first time, we were very unprepared and we didn't have a milligram scale. Instead, I took out a Pokemon card I had found on the floor at work out of my bag and poured a random amount onto it and started making lines. Which if you've done ketamine before, you'd know a line is probably way too much. But I took out a straw and snorted one of the lines and then handed it to Tony, who did the same. Isaac said he didn't want to do one because he wanted to make sure he could drive us back, because he already tried one before when he first got it. If I remember right, he said he'd just use his DMT cart pen he had with him instead, because DMT only lasts 10 minutes, and that cart was really weak and never got him to break through. The ketamine kicked in almost instantly, and I felt a huge wave of euphoria. Tony said he felt it too, and we talked about it for a little bit, until I remembered that I had brought nitrous oxide canisters for us to do too. We had tried it before, but only the small amount that comes in whipped cream cans, so this was like our first real time doing it. If you've never done nitrous before, it's like a very strong but very fast acting dissociative that goes well with psychedelics or other dissociatives, especially ketamine. Unfortunately, we weren't getting much out of it because instead of buying one of the big bottle crackers that are used to make homemade whipped cream, I cheaped out and bought a shitty hand cracker that barely worked. It struggled so hard to crack anything that I had to use my teeth to make it turn far enough, and it could only put one canister's worth into the balloon at a time. After trying for a while, we decided it didn't really feel like it was worth the effort, and we gave up. After that, we sat there for just a little bit. That eventually, a middle-aged man and woman randomly came up to us and started talking. The woman asked us if she could take off her shirt in front of us. I was very high and very dissociated, so this did not feel real, but everyone else saw them too, so I knew it wasn't a hallucination. The guy said he wanted to take photos of her like that, and we kind of cautiously said yes, but I guess they started to feel weird about it too and changed their minds. Very shortly after this, another group of people came over with a can of spray paint and started doing more graffiti on the stoner wall. We decided to leave because there was too much going on and we were getting overwhelmed. We got back in Isaac's car and he drove away. Isaac had to shit at a gas station and we all went in. Tony and I were extremely high and walked around the gas station while Isaac used the restroom for what felt like a super long time. The cashier said something about him being in there long, and I lied and said he was sick from eating too much Taco Bell to embarrass him. When he finally finished, we bought a couple things and left. Isaac drove us around for a little bit longer, but by that point, the ketamine was starting to wind down, and I told him to drop me back off at my house. I went inside and got comfortable in my bed until I fell asleep. I woke up the next day sober and fine. Even though I wasn't fully prepared and I did it in kind of a chaotic setting, I thoroughly enjoyed this trip. Recreational ketamine felt even better than the stuff at the clinic, and this experience definitely cemented ketamine as my new favorite drug, if the times at the clinic hadn't already. Isaac ordered 5 whole grams of ketamine, so there was still plenty of it left, and I wanted to meet up with him and Tony again to do it soon, which we ended up doing about 3 weeks to a month later. Tony was a lot more social than Isaac and I were, and knew a lot more people than we did. He met most of them from trying to find dealers and talking to a lot of the people at our school who did drugs. Sometimes he would introduce us to these people so we could hang out with them and get drugs from them. On that day, we planned to meet up with his friend Jack for the first time. Jack had really wanted to try ketamine, and Tony really wanted to try cocaine. So in exchange for us coming over and doing ketamine with him, he'd introduce us to someone who could get cocaine. At this point, all of us had been out of high school for a year, and Jack was only in the 10th grade. So I wasn't exactly excited to hang out with him, but I didn't have anything else better to do, so I went over anyways. Once we got there, Jack opened the door and let us into his room. His room was kind of cool. He had drawings and posters on his wall. He actually had the exact same Deadpool poster as I do on my wall, and he had his shelf with a bunch of energy drink cans he collected, which I also have in my room. We all sat down on the floor, and Isaac took out his bag and started pouring bumps for us. I think at this point we had a milligram scale, and he was measuring it, but we might have been eyeballing it. But either way, we all snorted a decent bump each. A ketamine kicked in fast, and soon we were all feeling pretty good. We introduced ourselves to each other and chatted for a little bit. So far, I thought Jack was okay. He's kind of annoying, but I just chalk that up to him being younger than us. He was playing rap music, which would have been fine if he didn't have massive speakers with the volume on way too loud, which was way too overstimulated for tripping. Shortly after, we decided we wanted to add some nitrous, so we started hitting our canister using the same shitty cracker as we did last time. We did that for a while until eventually this guy named Cliff came over. He was the guy Jack knew who knew a guy who sold cocaine. We all greeted him and he seemed nice enough at first. He had messaged the guy with the coke, but it would be a while before he could show up, which meant we had plenty of time to kill. Because of this, we offered Cliff a bump of ketamine, and soon enough he was tripping with us. A bit after that, things started to get a little bit weird. Jack had asked Cliff to show us his freestyling, to which he did, and it was pretty decent, but then he started lying to us, saying he was a famous rapper. He said he had 1 million followers on Spotify and that he made so much money that the government got him out of a jail sentence so they could take some of his profits. Tony, Isaac, and I used to be friends with this guy named Doug, who is in a good amount of other stories on this channel. He was a compulsive liar who'd make up shit to make himself seem cool all the time, and Cliff was starting to remind me a lot of him in this moment. I could tell that no one but Jack believed anything Cliff was saying, but no one felt like calling him out. A couple follow-up questions were asked, like what his Spotify name was, but he brushed them off without answering and we all moved on. Eventually the guy who had the cocaine pulled up outside and Cliff went to buy it from him. A bit later, Cliff came back in with a little bag and set it down on Jack's nightstand. Tony and Jack got up and walked over to him as he poured some of the powder out. He looked at it and touched it with his finger before saying, "This is fake." They were pretty upset and we talked about it for a little while, but I don't think he ever actually said why he thought it was fake. Without saying anything, Tony bent over and snorted a line of it. We were pretty surprised. I didn't even think he was gonna do it at all that day, but at least now we had some kind of way to tell if it was fake or not. Tony said he was already starting to feel stimulant-like effects shortly after, but I thought it had to be placebo. Impulsively, I bent over and did a line of it too. Obviously, this was a really bad idea. I wasn't even planning on doing any coke that day since we were already doing the ketamine. I had never done coke before and I had to work the next day at 6 a.m. But apparently this wasn't even cocaine and could be something dangerous, so it was an even worse idea. I think the reason I did it, other than my judgment being heavily impaired by the ketamine, was that I was curious and wanted to see for myself if it was real or not. I waited a bit after, but I wasn't sure if I felt anything or not. Even though he was the one who paid for it and originally wanted to use some of it himself, Cliff said he didn't care that it ended up being fake. Kind of abruptly, he started talking to Jack. I guess sometime before we met them, Cliff said he knew a guy who could sell Jack some kind of weed thing. I don't think they ever specified specifically what it was, and he said the guy was ready with it right then. Jack handed Cliff the money for it, and Isaac said he would drive us over to the guy. We got into Isaac's car, and following Cliff's directions, he drove us into some random parking lot. Shortly after we stopped, Cliff started saying one of the cars there belonged to an enemy of his, and that they would shoot us if they saw him. Most of us were still tripping off the ketamine because we redosed a couple times that night, myself included. So it was a lot scarier than it would have been normally, and Tony looked like he was about to cry. We tried to ask Cliff for more information, but he was really vague and started talking. And after talking about what we should do for a while, Isaac said he didn't feel comfortable and that he wanted to leave. Cliff told him to wait for a bit longer because someone was going to pick him up so he could leave. A guy came to the window of Isaac's car on the side where Cliff was. Cliff rolled down the window and the guy threw what was clearly a bag of cocaine into his lap, and I watched him put it in his pocket. I tried to ask him about it, but he didn't answer. Just said he had to leave as he opened the door and left with the guy who came to the window. As soon as Cliff was gone, Isaac backed out of the parking lot and sped down the road as fast as he could. Once we were further away, he slowed down and we started to calm down a bit. Jack realized that Cliff had left with his money, and he said he thought he did it on purpose. Considering that Jack was the only person out of us that actually knew Cliff, I asked him if he really thought he'd do that, and he just responded with probably, which really shocked me and pissed me off considering how much he seemed to trust him earlier. Isaac drove Jack back to his house, and the whole way there he was sending messages to Cliff, but he never replied. Once we arrived, Jack went inside, and the rest of us left. While we were in the car, the ketamine finished wearing off and the quote-unquote cocaine kicked in. Tony was right, it wasn't a placebo, and whatever we took was a real stimulant. I was fucking geeked, I felt amazing, and I told this to everyone else in the car. Tony agreed that he felt it a lot stronger now too, but he was still paranoid from the situation before and said that he thought one of the cars on the road was following us. We told him that it wasn't, and Isaac pulled into a gas station parking lot. I think it was one of those grocery store parking lot ones because the guy selling concessions was in a glass box outdoors. Isaac and I went up there to buy a few things, and at first I couldn't figure out how to get the drink that I bought out of the glass box thing, and I apologized to the cashier and said I was tired, but way too loudly and quickly, which made me look weird. We walked back to the car, and Isaac made fun of me for being weird to the cashier. We sat in the car for a while and started talking about the situation earlier. Since I was much more clear-headed than I was during it, after talking it through, I was able to come up with what had happened. Cliff was upset that the cocaine was fake. I still have no idea how he came up with the conclusion that it was fake just by touching it. So he came up with a plan. He messaged his friend, the one who came up to the window and threw him a cocaine baggie, to go buy some cocaine and then pick him up in that parking lot we went to. He told Jack they were going to do the deal, so he'd give him his money so he could steal it to make back the money he wasted on the fake stuff. Then when we were there, he said the thing about how he might get shot, to create enough panic and confusion that he could slip out with Jack's money. I relayed all this to Tony and Isaac very, very fast because I was geeked and excited I figured it out. They agreed that that was probably what happened and said they were mad at the guy. We also talked about the rapper stuff he said and how that was clearly fake too. Even though we had figured out what really happened, I think Tony was still scared because he said something about the cars following us again and we had to remind him that it wasn't real. Isaac drove me home and him and Tony left. The first thing I did when I got outside was to call in sick to work because there was no way in hell I was going to get up in time to start work at 6 a.m. I was able to fall asleep eventually though, and I woke up the next day feeling fine. I don't remember when exactly, but I think it was either that day or a few days later when I decided to pee in a water bottle and save it. We were all still curious about whether the quote-unquote cocaine was real or not, and what it was if it wasn't. So Isaac said next time I saw him, he'd give me one of those at-home drug tests to try. When I got the test from him, I took the bottle out and tested my urine. The test came back negative for cocaine, meth, amphetamine, MDMA, and everything else that was on the test except for THC. There was a chance I waited too long to test for it, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. Online it says cocaine stays in the urine for about 4 days, and I'm pretty sure I peed into the bottle within that amount of time. So unless it degrades outside of your body, if you leave it out too long, then if it was real cocaine, it would have shown up. I know the test was properly detecting things because it showed the THC, which I did do. So it seems like Cliff was right and it was fake. It really did feel like a stimulant though, and my only guess for what it what it actually was some obscure research chemical. The reason I don't think it was placebo like the times I talked about in my Tylenol video is because even though we had never done cocaine before, Tony and I were very experienced with stimulants and knew what they felt like. This stuff felt pretty similar to the ones I've tried, and it was also way too strong to be placebo. It's also worth mentioning, to this very day I still haven't tried real cocaine, so I don't have a frame of reference for what it's supposed to feel like, but if I ever do, I'll write a comment comparing it to the stuff from this story. Overall, this was one of the worst, or at least... Overall, this was probably the worst, or at least one of the worst ketamine trips I've ever had. The ketamine felt great like it always does, and so did the mystery stimulant, but obviously the people I was with ruined it. I guess Jack didn't do anything wrong directly, but it was super reckless of him to invite over a guy he didn't know that well, especially when we were all intoxicated. I fucking hate Cliff though. He was willing to rob someone who trusted him and make a bunch of people who were tripping think they were about to get shot, all because he was out like $60. Jack invited him into his home and we gave him a good amount of ketamine completely free, but he was willing to fuck us over for something that wasn't even our fault. He's a lying bastard, and I hope that eventually acting that way catches up with him and he gets assaulted or worse. Stuff like this is why I don't recommend getting high or tripping around people you don't know well, especially if you're meeting them for the first time. I know it may seem tempting because you want to get drugs or something, but it's just not worth it because you're vulnerable in that state and you don't know who you can trust. Like I said, Tony was a lot more social than I was, and he introduced me to a lot of new people. In fact, the next video I'm going to be doing is going to be another story about him introducing me to new people while I'm on ketamine. But I feel like a majority of those times were negative, like this one. I don't talk to him or anyone mentioned in these stories anymore, and I think it's for the best. My life is a lot less interesting for sure, but it's also less chaotic and stressful. Thanks for watching the video all the way through, and hopefully I'll have another ketamine one up soon. Bye.